Hi, and welcome to a really quick video on some suggestions and resources for when you begin your revising and proofreading steps after that first rough draft has been returned to you. So, before you start the revision process, which comes first before the proofreading process, the thing you need to look at is the final draft rubric. This is already posted online on Canvas for you. Make sure that you look this up so you know exactly what you were getting graded on, how much each of those sections are worth, and what all you need to have in order to get full credit. Okay? If you have any questions about that rubric or you don't understand how something is going to be graded, please contact me. Okay? So this is going to be extremely important during your revision step because if there are certain things that you are required to have, then you are going to want to make sure that those are taken care of during your revision steps, that by the time you get to that final draft, everything that is required to the extent that it is required is there. And this way you're also not going to be wasting time working on things that you don't really need to be doing. Okay, so a quick reminder of the difference between revision and proofreading, okay, because a lot of people think that these are the same things when they are very, very different. Revision is going to be focused on content. So what are you actually saying? How are you saying it? What kind of proof do you have? And so on and so forth. So this is going to be looking at your thesis. It's going to be looking at your introduction and your conclusion to see if they are fully fleshed out. Does the introduction establish the topic so that we're not just thrown into your essay, which happens a lot if you start with the thesis? Do we have information in the introduction that gets our attention or makes us want to read more? Do we have a very strong thesis that tells us exactly what you're arguing and how we're going to get through your argument? Are the main points developed and in the same order that they are in the thesis? Is there a counter-argument and a refutation that is complete and logical? And then the conclusion, does the conclusion wrap up the essay well with good closing comments? So sometimes this can be a call to action. Sometimes this can be brought back to the introduction. We talked about this in class and you should have it in your notes. If you don't have it in your notes, contact a classmate and see if they have it for you. Revision is also going to be looking at rhetorical balance. So it's going to be seen in all of your main points and your counter-argument and your refutation, are we balancing ethos, logos, and pathos? Okay, so ethos, credibility. Do we have enough sources or are we just kind of speaking in generalities? Because without ethos, we don't have any support to back us up besides just our general opinions, and that is not enough for an argument. Pathos, do we give people motivation to care? And remember, pathos can share the spotlight with ethos and logos. So sometimes facts can really become emotional for us because they're very startling or they really show us the gravity of a situation, or sometimes the credibility that we're bringing into the main point or the counter argument can also be a little bit emotional because we are seeing how these experts are all agreeing and we really need to do this as well. Reminding us what the stakes are, what's going to happen if you don't do what we say, or there's a lot of different ways you can work that. So ethos, logos, pathos, making sure that all of those are balanced. And also, plagiarism check should be in the revision stage. So this is making sure that anytime that you used information from a source, that there is a citation, which is information inside of parentheses with a matching MLA works cited reference at the end of the paper. Okay? If you used a direct quote, it should be in quotation marks with a citation and a matching works cited citation. If you did a paraphrase or a summary, it should still have a citation in parentheses and a matching works cited citation as well. Use your Turnitin report to help you. Look for patchwork plagiarism. Look for places where you forgot quotation marks. Look for data that has been used but not cited. Okay? So use this tool to help you. And if you don't know how to read a Turnitin report or how to run one before you actually turn in something, there are videos under our modules that teach you how to do that. So look for that. All right, so that is revision. Proofreading is going to be looking at the style or the craft of writing. So this is when we get into subtitling and transitions. So are we using good transition words or transition sentences? Does your paper need subtitles? Some of them will, some of them won't. It's going to look at paragraph structure and flow. So with each paragraph, do we have a topic sentence with all the other sentences supporting or belonging under that topic sentence? And do the ideas within each paragraph flow clearly one into another? Or do they just kind of feel all mashed together and not really making any sense? Sentence fluency. Are we writing incomplete sentences? Are there incomplete sentences? Are there run-on sentences? Pronoun usage. Are we using appropriate pronouns? So this means I, you, we, us, me, my, all of those are not going to be used because those are first and second person voice, and we are not using them in an academic essay. Now, there are some times in academic essays where you can use first and second person voice. However, because there are a lot of situations where you cannot, we want to practice working through an essay not using those voices. You guys already know how to use them. What you need to practice on is how not to use them. So you cannot use them in your final drafts. Integration of information. So when we're using sources or sourced information, does it make sense? Or do we have drive-by quotes? Do we have details that make absolutely no sense because of how you tried to reword them? Okay, so looking at that. Repetition. Are you saying the same thing over and over and over again? Or are you trying to introduce your quote by telling us what your quote is going to say right before your quote says it, or by repeating what the quote said right after we put the quote in there? So watching out for that repetition, especially around quotes, or even just repeating the same phrases or sentences or ideas over and over and over in an essay without actually developing them or bringing something new to them. Word choice. Are we using appropriate words, or are you using the same kind of words over and over and over? If you're using higher vocabulary words, are they used appropriately? If you change some words out in the thesaurus, does it still have the correct meaning on both levels, connotation and denotation? So just as a quick reminder, denotation is a dictionary definition. Just because two words are synonyms does not mean that they mean the same thing. Okay? So, for example, we have pretty, right? And we have gorgeous, all right? In the English language, these are synonyms. However, we know that their connotation, the way that they mean in our culture, have very different meanings, because pretty is not as strong of a word as gorgeous. Gorgeous is usually stacked a little bit higher. We can also see how words can change meaning within context. Okay? So a very famous example is the word bitch. If you are talking about a female dog, that is the scientifically correct word to use for a female dog, and it's perfectly appropriate. However, if you use it in a different context, like calling a female human a bitch, it could be a compliment, it could be an insult, it could be a lot of different things. Also, if the context is you're calling a human male a bitch, completely different meaning once again. So they can change within context. So are we using the appropriate words for the appropriate situations? Are we using inflammatory language? So language that is trying to make a really big emotional point, but it's not accurate to the actual situation, or it's creating a logical fallacy like ad hominem. So instead of just very strongly wording what your counter argument is because of your adjective choice or your verb choice, you are actually insulting the opposition. We can't insult them. We are attacking their argument, not the people. Ad hominem, okay? So also with word choice, are we using just the same verbs over and over again? Are we using like the same basic structure, or are there other words that we could choose that would more clearly or more powerfully get our point across? Okay. Grammar. The biggest issues with grammar that I tend to see in papers are subject-verb agreement. So he walk instead of he walks, that kind of thing. We also have problems with plurals and using apostrophes correctly. There are many resources online and on your module for revision that will help you with some of these trickier grammar issues. And if you have one that you've noticed or you just don't understand, feel free to contact me and I will get you some resources on that. But definitely check for grammar. Having poor grammar in a final draft has a bad reflection on you as a writer because it feels unfinished and like you don't care. And in some cases, it might actually make people doubt your credibility because it seems like you weren't careful enough to actually go back and do a grammar check and to make sure that everything was polished and complete like it was supposed to be. Punctuation. Are we using semicolons and commas appropriately? Those are the two things that tend to get us in trouble the most. But there could be other punctuation issues. Exclamation points are not very common in academic essays, as well as hypothetical questions. While they can happen, we want to use them sparingly. They're kind of like salt. Add too many of them and it becomes a very informal essay. We also, in the proofreading stage, want to look for MLA-style errors. Now, this is different than a plagiarism check. A plagiarism check is going to make sure that I have not copied anything without giving credit. Okay? An MLA-style check is going to make sure that words are capitalized when they should be, that the periods are in the right locations, that you put quotation marks around titles of articles, but italicize titles of books and websites. It's going to make sure that like the period for the sentence is outside of the citation, not inside of the citation, that you spelled the author's names correctly. Like those are MLA style errors, and those are very different than plagiarism errors. Because plagiarism errors means that you copied something without giving credit, you paraphrased something without giving credit, you did patchwork plagiarism, whether or not you gave credit. Right? So it's a lot about credit and how you're rewording things, where MLA style is, are you writing the citations correctly, not whether or not you actually have them. Okay? So, how are we going to revise this final draft? First, please read my feedback. I spend a good bit of time on this, picking out things that you really need to know. And I'm also looking at this both short-term and long-term. So short-term, what do you need for that final draft essay rubric? Because I wrote it. I'm the one who's going to be using it to grade it. So I know what you need to do to like get there. But I'm also thinking long term, what is going to help you as a writer, as a researcher, as a critical thinker in your college career, in your work career, in your future in general. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm pointing out the important things that you really need to work on. So if I tell you, hey, these 2 main points are not developed enough, and you don't do anything with them, chances are you're going to be losing points on that final draft, especially if I have pointed it out specifically and you ignored it. Now, if you have a difference of opinion with something, please just contact me. I do have an open mind, and I would like to hear what you have to say. And I will talk to you about things and explain where I'm coming from, and we can always talk out any misconceptions or misunderstandings that we have or differences in style. Okay? But please, 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 please read that feedback and ask me questions if you have them. If I told you that you're dropping your antecedents, which I would never actually say because that's such a specific grammatical thing, most of you don't know what that means. But if I did end up saying something like that, then you have no idea what it means, ask me. Okay? You don't necessarily, you can ask other people, but if you can, always go back to the source and say, okay, what did you mean by this? What are you looking for with this? And I'm more than willing to expand on things. When you're also revising, look at your individual main points, the things that are supporting your argument. Highlight for rhetorical balance. So pick one color for ethos, one color for pathos, and one color for logos. And remember, rhetorical balance isn't going to be absolutely equal, like 2 ethos, 2 pathos, and 2 logos per paragraph. But it is going to be balanced because pathos, we don't need a whole lot. Logos, we need a whole bunch. And ethos will depend on your main point. So you may need a lot, you may need only just a little. It depends. Ask yourself the WH questions. So for your arguments, ask yourselves who, what, where, when, why, and how. Especially the why and how. All right, those 2 tend to be the ones that help us notice if we have not developed something sufficiently and haven't really discussed everything about it. So if you are proposing that we need new legislation, what legislation is that? How is it going to work? Right? How are we going to get this legislation passed? Why should people in the House or the Senate pass this? Okay, so ask yourself those questions, and if you aren't getting answers to them in your paragraph, you might want to consider including more information. Also play the specific general game. You can do this by highlighting. You can just do this by reading through and marking things, like with an S or a G, or you can just give your paragraph an overall score. But we want to have more specifics than generalities. And it's very, very common for paragraphs to start with the general and then get more specific. Sometimes they will start with something very specific and stay very specific. But we definitely want to make sure that we're giving specific examples and not just giving very general, vague, overarching ideas that aren't very detailed and aren't really getting to the heart of the issue. It's like saying, oh, there's lots of things we can do to help with global warming, like stop polluting. Okay, well, stop polluting isn't very specific. Like, there's so many different types of pollution. There's water pollution, there's air pollution, and noise pollution. And then even if we picked water pollution, well, there's lots of different things about water pollution. There's agricultural runoff, there's city sewer runoff, there is private sewer runoff, there is what chemicals we put into the ground, how do we dispose of paint and oils and other things, so much goes into that. And so if you are not looking at all of those details, you're not going to have a very strong developed argument. Also, In the revision step, check for refutations. It is really, really common to stick a counter argument in there and forget to actually refute it. You don't want to just hand your paper over to the opposition. You want to bring in the opposition in order to preemptively destroy the opposition, right? If you are going to grab a peer and have them help you revise, which I highly, 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 highly suggest that you do, there's some key things to remember. First, correct what the instructor pointed out. So you should not take your rough draft that you just turned in to your professor and immediately hand it over to a peer, because you are probably going to get a lot of the same feedback. All right. And you don't really need an echo chamber, and you don't need people doing the same thing more than once. So first, go ahead and correct everything that you can from what the instructor pointed out, and then have somebody revise it for you. Okay? Find a peer that you trust, that you think can give you solid feedback. Or a LARC tutor is always an option, and there's virtual sessions that you can do, so you can actually have video chat with them right now. Give your tutor or your peer specific questions to answer. Don't just hand them your paper and say, here, tell me something. Okay? Give them a specific direction. So if, for example, I told you that your organization really needs some work, and you tried reorganizing it, ask your peer, hey, how does organization work now? Do you think it sounds better? Do you get lost anywhere? Does everything make sense? Okay. If you don't know what questions to ask them, I have a very detailed peer review sheet with tons of questions that is posted up under modules, and you can ask them to answer as many or as all of them as you want. Make sure that you're giving them sufficient time. If the final draft is due tomorrow, please do not give them your paper tonight. Be respectful of other people's time, and know that some people may be slower readers, they may be faster readers. They may be slow revisers, they may be fast revisers. They may have a lot of other things on their plate, including classes and jobs and stuff, and they're totally willing to do your paper, but they're going to have to work it into your schedule. So make sure that you're giving people sufficient time to work on this and not putting them under a lot of pressure, because you want them to be able to give you good, detailed feedback. Right? And finally, ask follow-up questions. So if you cannot read their handwriting, ask what this stuff says. If they commented and highlighted things in lots of different colors and you don't know what the colors mean, ask. If they made a suggestion but you didn't understand how to actually follow through with it, ask. Okay? Always know who is giving you feedback and ask them follow-up questions if you do not understand something. All right? So what revision resources do you have? First of all, feedback from me, your instructor. This is really going to be helpful. Second, that LARC tutoring, and then also the revision strategies module that we have on Canvas. The things that I suggest the most, if you need a little idea of why do I actually really need to do this, or if you just need a little bit of a study break that's kind of fun, I put up a video from a TED Talk called Revision is Magic. That is quite fun. But it does really show the power of revision. And then I do have 3 detailed lectures, so to speak, of revision strategies focused on developing organization and integrating your sources and working with sources and avoiding plagiarism and all that. So if these are things that you know you need to work on and you don't really know how, here is a really good resource for you. So you can just pop up those videos. I believe they're hosted on YouTube right now, and watch away. All right, so after we've gotten our revision step done, so our content is good. Now we need to do one more comb through the material and proofread it. So how do you proofread something yourself? Well, part of the problem with proofreading something yourself is that It doesn't matter how great of a writer you are or how amazing your grammar skills are. You are going to miss things if you only proofread by yourself, by reading it through and calling it good. And the reason why is because you are the one who wrote this. You know what everything is supposed to say and what everything is supposed to sound like. And so a lot of times when you're just scanning through the screen, your brain is going to fill in those blanks because it knows what's supposed to be there. So if you wrote down the wrong spelling of a word, which actually changes the meaning of the word, or use the wrong there, like THERE instead of THEIR, then your brain can often correct those and you won't even see it. You won't even hear it, okay? So this is why reading your essay out loud to yourself is so powerful, because your brain isn't just processing this as visual communication information, it's also doing visual to auditory. And in order for your brain to take written words, transform them into spoken speech, and then hear them, transmit that into language in your head, you're doing a lot of different brain processes. You're going back and forth between the left brain and the right brain. And chances are you are going to hear really long run-on sentences. You are going to hear more of your incomplete sentences. You are going to catch a lot of your grammar errors, especially if you are paying attention to reading each word as they appear instead of what you think the sentence should sound like. And sometimes it can help to actually use your finger and have your finger underneath each word as you say it, just to slow you down. Another thing that you can do is read your essay out loud to yourself backwards. So read the last sentence, and then the sentence before it, and then the sentence before it, and then the sentence before it. Now, this isn't going to help you with content most of the time. Sometimes reading the essay out loud in the proofreading step might highlight something you missed in the revision step. But reading the essay backwards isn't going to help with that, but it is going to take things slightly out of context so that you can hear the grammar, the punctuation, the syntax, the word choice, all of that a lot more clearly. If you are using Microsoft Word, I'm not sure what the program is for Mac. It might be Pages. And then there's also the Grammarly app. They will often give you suggestions for correcting grammar, punctuation, spelling, capitalization errors. Some of those are going to be correct. Some of those will not. And as someone who is very skilled in English, there's a lot of times that I have to tell Microsoft Word to ignore things because I know it's correct. And that is the way I want to use it. But it doesn't recognize it necessarily. For example, the word cyberbullying. Is it 2 words? Is it a hyphenate? Or is it 1 word? It's becoming pretty common to see cyberbullying as 1 word. But most programs are still going to recognize it as 2 words or a hyphenate. So depending on what the standard is, you may have to tell them, yeah, it's fine like this. Ignore all these. Okay? Grammarly tends to have pretty good suggestions for you. I don't know if it's free anymore or if you have programs that have that are connected to it that is free. I do know that there may be some privacy issues connected with Grammarly, so just be careful with that. If you need some help with specific things, so if during the peer stage or if I gave you feedback, people are noting, hey, you're really struggling with punctuation or comma usage, or hey, you have a lot of like subject-verb agreement errors, or you have like a lot of run-on sentences, and you're like, I don't even know what that is, or how to find them, or how to fix them. I put a lot of YouTube tutorials posted up underneath our revision module that are pretty good, pretty concise, and can give you a good start on understanding that and learning how to find them yourself. Another thing with proofreading is checking for first or second person voice. We've already talked about that. But even doing like for a Word document, you can do Control F, which is find, and you can type in capital I. And of course, it's going to point out, any words that begin with a capital I, but it'll also help you check to make sure that you didn't use I want, or I desire, or I think, or I am going to in your paper. You also want to check for informal language. Contractions, it's debated a lot about whether or not these can still be used in academic writing. Personally, it's not a big deal for me unless you're using ones like ain't or would've. But can't, won't, shouldn't, whatever. Those are fine for me. But we do want to check for more informal language. So if it's sounding a little bit more slang-like, or if we are sounding a little bit more like a blog or a rant, that's probably a good sign that we've gone informal, and we need to make sure that we're using a more formal tone. And if you are really struggling with that, again, there's resources for you to help you recognize that and change that. Also, look up any other issues noted by the instructor. So if there are other things that I noted for you, like apostrophe usage or quotation marks, and you're just really struggling with understanding when and how to use them, there are resources posted, or if there aren't, you can often find tutorials on your own, or if you want really good ones that you know you can trust, ask me and I will get them for you.